Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Jill Shuller.
So the sweatshirt that I'm wearing is an authentic 50th anniversary edition Corvette emblem. And unfortunately, the shirt and the car that goes with it aren't mine, or they weren't mine. They belong to my late fiance, Jack, who bought for his 50th birthday his favorite color, maroon, and he bought a Corvette to honor his birthday. I never did get a chance to see that car because he sold it before we met, but he proudly kept replicas of it in both his home and his office. When I met Jack, actually, he was driving a Ford F-150, and I was driving a Mazda minivan. I loved driving the Ford F-150. I could sit up high, it had all this power, I was in control of the road, and Jack seemed to like driving my Mazda minivan, but I don't know why. One time when we were driving on the highway, and Jack was actually driving my car, he pulled over very slowly and indicated for me to look over at the odometer. And I was really kind of concerned what was going on, and he came to a very slow stop. And eventually he said, "Look," immediately the odometer flipped over to exactly 123,456 miles. Oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We were very much nerds, and we took a picture of it. Did we know how to have a good time or what? Jack and I never would have met if it hadn't been for online dating. And who would have thought that people that came from such different worlds would have fallen in love and become soulmates, which is not something I really thought existed. One of the things that made us different was that I had a white-collar job, Jack had a blue-collar job. He was from the West Side, I was from the East Side. He was Catholic, I was Jewish. Well, I still am Jewish. He loved country music, and I was into jazz. But we had a lot of things in common as well. We had a love for problem solving together and being authentic, and we shared the same values. We loved live entertainment. We loved riding motorcycles. We loved skydiving. We loved the fact that we were both parents of adult children. In fact, my son, when we first started dating, and he met Jack, he was absolutely convinced I must have scoured the internet to find somebody by the name of Jack, so we would be Jack and Jill. He didn't believe me that really wasn't true. It was a coincidence. My son lived in Orlando and didn't get a chance to see Jack very often, but my daughter, who lived, her name is Bryn, she lived in Athens when she was at Ohio University, and she and Jack became very close. In fact, one time, her very first experience on a motorcycle was on the back of Jack's Harley. And we were on our way to a 4th of July celebration, and she was on the back of his bike with her arms spread as far as she could, like she was flying. And I was, of course, behind in my Mazda minivan, watching the whole thing almost like a Norman Rockwell painting. And Jack just thought how great it was to have her on the back of his bike, and she felt like nothing, and he just loved that experience, and all of us enjoyed that together. One of the other things that Jack and I had in common was our love of metaphysics. And when I say metaphysics, I interpret that as the unnatural connection between minds and matter. And when Jack and I talked, one time we realized that we had both experienced looking up the stars when we were very little kids. I don't think it's still up there. But when we were very little kids, and just wondered why we were here. What's the reason for people being here? Why are we here? And both of us were apparently very deep thinkers. Well, one time, Jack and I were getting particularly metaphysical together. And Jack kind of said to me he wondered why he was still here. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I'm a really old soul. Jill, I've been around many, many times. And I just hope I get this life right, but I don't know why I'm still here. And I was really concerned and kind of scared. And I said, do you want to die? He said, no, but I'm really ready to find out what comes next. And I really want to get this life right. And I said, what comes next? I said, that would be me. Hello, we're here. Don't leave me. Eerily, a year later, and 3 years into our relationship, I did lose Jack to cancer. And it was the most devastating, painful experience of my life. He was diagnosed with a large lung tumor on his, up here near his shoulder, one on his head, and he also had cancer all the way up and down his spine. And it didn't seem possible because he was working 2 jobs. He was working out at the gym 3 times a week. We went motorcycle riding. We did everything together. He had no symptoms. The only thing that was bothering him was this sore arm that he thought had been from working out. Well, we spent 2 weeks in the UC Neurological Center trying to stem the hemorrhaging that was going on in his brain. And it was extremely difficult. He was fading. His ability to speak was extremely limited. And he had also learned he only had weeks to live. And so I spent every minute of those 2 weeks understanding that floor, learning the staff, and sitting by his side. And towards the end of that 2-week period where he was being treated, I summoned up the courage to ask him if he remembered that metaphysical conversation about getting life right. And he nodded his head. And so did I. During that time, his daughter, who lived in Jacksonville, Florida, decided she was going to take Jack to her home in Jacksonville, Florida, and take care of him for the rest of his life, the 3 weeks or so that he had. And the family and I were devastated. It was her choice, but we were all devastated that he would be taken away from all the friends. He had 5 siblings, and family and friends that he ever knew. And it was a very difficult 3 weeks to not be with him and to wait for the call. And finally, we did get the call that he was going very, very quickly and to get down there. So Bryn and I, my daughter, flew down there as quickly as we could. And by the time we got there, he was able to recognize who I was and that I was there, but that was about all. And he died about a day and a half later. Unfortunately, when they came to take Jack that morning, the funeral home, and came and picked him up, his daughter told everybody we needed to leave immediately. And it was devastating. And so Bryn and I, the next thing we knew is that we were in an airport at the auto rental counter because we were planning on visiting Mark in Orlando before we would go back to Cincinnati. And we wondered how we could be there. I stood there in the airport and it was just like, Jack just died. How could I be in an airport? This was just so surreal. We never had time to comfort. We had no closure. We didn't get a chance to share stories. There was just emptiness right there. And when we went to the counter to rent a car, all of the car rental agencies were booked. They didn't have any cars, with the exception of one agency. And they did have rental cars, but they were charging $120 per day. And I was just devastated. And I looked up and I was like, Jack, what could I do? And it was just an automatic response. And the next thing I knew, Bryn and I were called over back to the counter, and the gentleman said, we do have one car reasonably priced that we'll give you. And Bryn looked over at me and she goes, Mom, that was Jack. And I said, I feel that too. So we got our car, we went to dinner, and as soon as we gave our order to the server, she came back with a spread of hors d'oeuvres, and she said, it's on the house. Well, Bryn and I just looked at each other and went, that was Jack. There would be no reason for someone to do that. Bryn and I went and visited with my son the next day and prepared to get on our flight back to Cincinnati. So we got to the gate, and the ticket agent said, "Ma'am, there's something different, and something has changed with your ticket." And I'm like, oh my God, this is not what I needed right now. What's going on? And she said, "Ma'am, you and your daughter have been bumped to first class. Enjoy your ride." Something you should know is that Jack and I discovered one of the things that we had in common is that neither of us had ever flown first class, and it was on our bucket list to do so. When Bryn and I boarded the plane, there were our seats, 1A, 1B, right in front, right next to each other. And the entire flight was full, with the exception of one other seat, which was empty, with a bottle of water and a blanket. And it was that 3A? The third seat in first class, right next to us. 1A, 1B, 1C. And so Bryn and I immediately just said, "Now, Jack, you're just showing off." So we knew that Jack would be riding first class with the two of us, and the three of us could cross that off of our bucket list. When I got home, driving around, I was devastated, I was grieving, I was crying constantly in my Mazda minivan. And I was talking to Jack, and I felt like he was talking back, and that we were connecting. And he would tell me that his entity was no longer the form that I remembered, but to remember him the way that I could, and that he was an energy that recognized human energy. Sometimes when I was driving around, I would wear this shirt that has the 50th anniversary Corvette edition of the car he loved so much that I never got to see. And I also began, after a couple of months, when I was driving around and crying and talking to Jack, I kind of started to feel silly. I thought, oh my gosh, this isn't really Jack. We aren't really all that connected. This is just all in my mind. How could this be? And then I heard Jack say, "Baby doll." He used to call me baby doll. In fact, the first time he called me baby doll, he asked for my permission because he didn't want me to be offended. I loved it when he called me baby doll. So he said, "Baby doll, do you want me to prove to you that this is real and that we really are connected and you are having conversations with me?" And I said out loud, I went, "Yeah, Jack, show me what you got." And right then, driving right past me was a maroon Corvette.
One more time for Jill Shuller.